Little breakdown of what we'll cover. There's a handful of marketing strategies that no one would ever label them in this way, but that I've kind of witnessed in my time working across various agencies, across various sectors. Then looking at building a solid foundation in terms of your website. So what needs to underpin a website to allow you to move on to content marketing, SEO, and not be on the back foot from the word go? Giving consideration to content, how do we go about that process? And I'll kind of share a few areas where I think it's gone horribly wrong in the past, and areas where just listening more and thinking less can help a hell of a lot. And then I'm going to run through a practical example, as James mentioned, of some UX analysis that I performed on their site, which was one that we built. So sometimes you do hold your hands up and say, we're 6 months in, this website isn't doing what it's supposed to do, or people aren't reacting in the way we wanted them to. Let's have a look at it properly, let's see it through their eyes, and see how we can improve things. I wasted a lot of time trying to work out where this quote actually came from. Is there anyone who thinks they can have a stab at where it's from? I was turned into a quiz, lovely. There's a lot of furrowed brows. Well, yeah, see, this is where I got a little bit lost trying to find it, because it is from Field of Dreams, or it's a slight play on it. But the reason I've put it here is because this is the worst marketing strategy ever. And it's one that some of the kind of areas that we might talk about here, it's a phrase that they might not use, but they might be thinking in the back of their mind in marketing teams, in brand teams, in design, in development. There's a number of ways in which a web project can go wrong, and it can be these strategies that can cause it. A kind of arrogance based on the fact that a team might just think, well, we're massive, we're a huge brand, we'll just build something. It'll work because everyone knows who we are. Or conversely, just hope that if the rest of this sector or the rest of this vertical or marketplace doesn't really know what they're doing, then we'll find a way to the top. Denial, we don't really need marketing, is again something I've heard. Speed, trying to churn something out quickly, which from what I've heard isn't really a thing in pharma, or at least not consistently. And then simplicity or complexity. If you go too much one way, if you go too simple, put a brochure website out there, Google's not going to have the content it needs to start indexing you and showing you for the relevant searches. You go too complex, and actually you end up having the same effect, because Google can't understand the complexities of your website. It can't work its way through your sitemap. It can't actually find and serve the content that it needs. So if you remember, I'm sure because it's worked its way from Netflix to Channel 5 to Channel 4 in the opposite order, hopefully a lot of you remember Joey putting a map on the floor in London, in fact, probably not far from here, and trying to work out where he was on the map. I've been in creative agencies where I've heard this phrase, and it needs to die, because if we're not in a situation, and even with the people in this room, but in terms of the marketing industry, the development teams we have, the processes we have, the technology we have, if we can't visualize a sitemap and a website and the way that it needs to work, operate, or the way a user needs to flow through it, without having to print it off and literally walk around on it, then how do we expect a user to do it when it actually comes to developing that website and putting it out there? So you've no divine right to traffic. Even the biggest brands can't forget about acquisition. You need an acquisition strategy. You think of some of the biggest brands in any arena, they still have to do marketing. There's very few that can now get away with not. And just putting a website out there is not going to be sufficient. So when I talk about content ideation, moving on a little bit now, I'm talking about the process of coming up with content ideas. So it's not all creativity clubs, workshops, and brainstorming. And I'm glad that I'm not going to be conflicting massively with Sam here, because it sounds like there's a real science and thought process behind what they do that isn't three people in a stock photo in a room drawing on a whiteboard, hoping that they come up with the magical idea. There's a lot more that goes into it. The ideas that people have in this situation is such a microcosm. Even if these people had 30 years experience in the industry each, they've got 30 years of very specific experience, and the market can broaden, people's ideas can broaden, what they want out of content can change quite significantly. And if we silo ourselves to being a group of marketers or a brand team in a room, we're never going to come up with the next idea for content. This is the start of examples involving James's brand. Part of the reason he invited me here today, because there's a string of them. But sometimes it's as simple as finding a gap and filling it with content. A lot of my process that I'll talk you through, and just a few little practical examples, are very much opportunism. There's a strategy that sits behind what we do, and God knows we wouldn't be able to call ourselves strategic if there wasn't. But equally, on a monthly basis or a weekly basis, there's spotting opportunities to fill a gap with content, and Google is full of gaps. Had a kind of joke there earlier with a couple of guys about you'd do well to find a Google whack nowadays, in that there's very few Google searches with no results, but there's a lot of Google searches with very weak results. And I'll go on to a few of those as we go through this. But essentially, this was just, Zinc Maps is a thing, it's a product. And for 28B, we're just, in conjunction with James, we've just written a resource about 600 words long that just got there a bit before other people talking about it. And now it's there. And it's staying there, and it's driving a lot of this traffic. So things to consider in the content process, where you're not three people in a room with a whiteboard, you're one person sitting looking at the opportunity, is your niche, but then a niche within that niche. And hopefully this can feel a little applicable, because talking about different drugs, different trials, different changes in the way pharma operates, I know there's barriers, but there's also there's opportunities where something new can emerge every 6 months, 12 months, whatever that period of time is. Pharma companies will have a really specific niche that they can talk about, and if they can get that out there early and branch off sufficiently far down that niche so that they've really covered it in specific, precise detail as opposed to going too broad, then you can start to target the search phrases you want, and you're going to get people with high intent in some of those cases. In this case, James is never going to get any business from someone who searched for an iOS device dimensions table, but we've done something that's helpful. And I think Sam used the phrase helpful or something similar. Your marketing has to be there. You have to provide some value to people. What do you want people to associate your brand with? If it isn't being helpful, then what is it? And you need to accept that these aren't always going to be your end customers or end users, but they could be 3 steps removed. They could be someone who's found it really useful, gone to a networking event, spoken to someone who's like, oh, I came across this company that does digital development for pharma. It's not all here. It's not all this one person looking at Google searching for something. You've got to consider the wider reaches that they might have. So the focal point and a focal page of the content theme is really important. I kind of covered that. But then there's also this opportunism element, PDFs. There are a lot of PDFs from what I've seen in pharmaceutical marketing. It's data capture and serving people a white paper or a guide is pretty prevalent. I'm amazed this is here, because PDFs do appallingly badly in search. Google doesn't like them. It's starting to index them better, but they present a massive opportunity for anyone who's in that space looking for quick win opportunities where instead of chucking a load of resource at a 4,000, 5,000 word white paper, you write a 400 word abstract, put a blog together, and as a result you're here rather than here. Just because you've open sourced that, you've been a bit more helpful. And don't, if this is potentially a sticking point, but don't wait. Most of the best content we've put out has been incomplete because we've got it out there before it's being talked about widely, before all the information's available. You think of some of the things you might search for over the course of your day that's completely not, non-work related. Things like football's a great example. You get people searching for what time does the FA Cup final kick off, and there's no value in that. But the Daily Mail have got there 30 seconds before the Sun, who have got there 3 minutes before the Mirror in putting out their post about the FA Cup final. All it does is answer that question plus 800 words of rubbish. But the timeliness is so important. That's obviously in a real microcosm, but in pharma, that stretches out over years. You get some people not talking about something because they feel like they can't. I know it's not necessarily the industry to be teasing information, but if you can get there early and stay there. So there's a couple of tips on how, for James and 28B in this instance, we've tried to generate traffic without just talking about your solutions or services all the time. Now I'm going to move on to talking about, once we've got them there, how do we keep them? How do we keep them interested? So these guys are back again because it's not about them. User experience is very much about the silent majority. So these are the people who have visited your website, haven't enjoyed it, and have told you nothing about their experience because they've got no platform to do so. Why would they? They've arrived, they've left, and they've gone in search of that information somewhere else. They're the people we need to try and find ways of listening to. And obviously, because they're not volunteering that data, we have to search a hell of a lot harder for it, but it's there if we put the metrics in place. Going back to, sorry, James. Going back to these three, if we're in a room saying, I don't think that button works there, we should move it, then we definitely haven't been listening to the people who are actually using the website, and we're getting in our own way a little bit. Couple of basic tools. I'm sure the majority of you will have heard of Google Analytics and Tag Manager, possibly Google Search Console, essentially just ways of tracking anonymized data about your website. Heat mapping and click journey tracking, which are two things I'm going to talk through in a little more detail, primarily through Hotjar. There are other tools available. I'll be honest, I don't know what they are because I found that one really useful. So I'm not going to go all BBC on it, but that's really where I'm going to focus because this is more tangible data. It's more visual, and it starts to build up a picture of where your website's falling down. So as you may have guessed, the practical example is 28B's website. So a few concepts just to cover off first. So one is scroll depth, which is something that Hotjar tracks. So if you go from top to bottom, obviously you probably can't see that particularly well, but trust me, this is 28B's homepage. As you scroll down, you'll see it gets bluer, essentially. So there's cutoff points here. This line here is a 50% marker. This line here is the average fold, so gives us a gauge of where content is actually sitting on people's, this is a desktop view, on people's desktop devices. So straight off the bat, by looking at this, you can guess the average fold, and we try to when we develop websites, but in different sectors and different industries, it's going to change. If we had a massive call to action button right here, then we know just from looking at this we're missing a trick because people have had to go hunting for it straight away. And then, as we'll move on to, we've got a lovely video that we invested a lot of time in down here. And And that blue shows us that less than 50% of the people who visit that homepage are actually getting that far down the page. So the other thing that it tracks, not just people scrolling or scrolling with their mouse, is clicks. So people's movement across the page and the areas in which they click. Again, it's not massively clear, but you'll see quite a few heat maps, kind of heat hotspots, sorry, across the top and in different areas on the page where we can see that people have been engaging with it. This is really useful to start working out where people's frustrations are on the site. And that's making sure you've covered people's frustrations is the first step towards serving them helpful content. This could be a sticking point. We'll see whether this works. So there's also user recordings. And James, if you click on the link over there, hopefully we'll play one. So this, when you first see it, can feel quite intrusive. This is an actual user on the 28B website and their journey through it, which has become a lot darker in this instance because of the internet connection. But what it gives you that full view. Believe me, you will go absolutely mental if you sit and work your way through about 100 of these. It gets really exciting for about 5, and then when you get to about 10, it's like, I'm not really learning anything here. The key is filtering. There's great options within Hotjar to filter down by things like device, the landing page in which people have first started the journey. So you can tackle a project at a time. You can tackle one landing page. So I want to look at people who have looked at that one, and I want to see what they've done, why they've left, where they've clicked and failed, where they've hovered over something for a longer period of time than is normal, thinking that there's going to be something, an interactive element or something. That's the areas where you can start to gain usefulness from this. Because if you just go in wholesale, you will burn a lot of time and not derive a lot of action. So these are the actual observations that I talked James through as a result of the analysis of those heat maps, click maps, and user recordings. Primarily for his homepage, we ran through it for the whole website. And you won't have necessarily seen it, so you have to take my word for it. But the Contact Us button is the most frequently clicked link on the homepage. No massive surprises there, and probably a good thing on the whole. You know, if you're a lead gen business, then you want people getting in touch. Then it starts to get a bit more damning, potentially interesting, you know, however you want to spin it. Only 30% of the visitors got as far down the page as the footer, but of those that were there, but 3% of the overall people who visited that page were trying to click on the accreditation logos at the bottom of the page that didn't do anything, to potentially verify the ability, accreditation's standing and status of that company, but with no real way of doing it. The video had quite significant interaction, but only 40% of the people actually got that far down the page, so isn't wasted in that position. The main call to action was discover more. Even putting it here, kind of, you internalize it slightly, I think that's really weak. And subsequently the click rate on that button, which is the main call to action, was weak. And people are consistently clicking on the header content in the areas of text, looking for internal links, looking for ways to navigate through the site from there, because there's some really important keywords in there. It's not doing anything. So from that, the important thing, because there's obviously investment in this sort of analysis, there has to be action. The actions for us were pretty clear. Make the footer logos clickable. The Viva partnerships and accreditation has to go through to the Viva landing page because clearly people are showing intent and interest. Experiment with a stronger, more sales-focused call to action. Book an introduction call was something we then looked to try, so that we're sorting the wheat from the chaff a little bit quicker. We're kind of cutting to the chase. We swapped the video section with who we work with to encourage more interaction with that, because again, it's an area that we've invested in, and we know it portrays the company better than any words could. And then we added internal links to the top of the page, and from subsequent analysis, we know people are now clicking through and continuing their journey. So in summary, which unfortunately is over here, successfully attracting, keeping visitors at your website isn't an internal project. It's not necessarily about creativity. It's about spotting opportunities. The data will help inform the decisions you make. Personas are really useful and make a massive difference once you've already got data and you know stuff about people. But if you know nothing about them other than we know there's a certain volume of people who search for this. We know there's a certain volume of people who visit our website, and when they do this, that, and the other. We need to go hunting for those opportunities. We need to be quite opportunistic. And the main thing is it's about kind of taking the blinkers off, casting aside any preconceptions about what content our audience might need, and listening to that silent majority. That's all.